Money in the Bank, Gary Sasse, the money man. Welcome. Good to see you today.
Always good to see you.
Especially good to be seen today. A little sad news. Somebody that I worked with for a number of years as a partner with over at RDW. You know, you had a probably longer relationship with him. Mike Doyle, one of the founding partners at RDW Group, passed away this weekend after a long battle with some illness. And you know, is one of those guys who kind of made Rhode Island go. The airport expansion, Providence Place Mall. He was kind of that guy you went to see to make big projects go. Built a wildly successful firm. Rich legacy working for Dupree and Claudine Schneider. What's your recollection on Mike?
Oh, I first met Mike when he was chief of staff to Governor Dupree. And he was serious, hardworking, and also a lot of fun. You know, half the time we were agreeing, other half the time we were fighting, but it was never personal. I remember one story when I was at RIPEC, when Dupree was governor the first term. We did our usual analysis of the budget, and I sent Mike and the governor, a copy the day or so before we released it, and Mike called up, "I want to come see you right now." I went to see him, and he was red-faced. I thought the heart attack was going to happen then. And there was some section of the analysis, which was generally pretty neutral. It wasn't favorable, it wasn't negative. But there was one section that they interpreted as being negative. And we had an argument for about 15, 20 minutes. I thought he'd pass out, but he was very intense. He was, focused. He was always a gentleman, always, honest in, what he did. Had a good strategic sense. He gave people a lot of advice on how to promote projects they were interested in. And it was generally good advice. So, he will be missed.
Yeah, I knew him from being partners with him. We went through tremendous growth. In 3 years, we went from 20 people to 120 people, and Mike was a very, very good business person. He really understood how to build a business. He understood how to create value in a company. He knew how to make it get profitable. Wildly aggressive, but also let people do what they needed to do to be successful. He'll be missed. I think the wake is on Wednesday, and the funeral's on Thursday. I'm sure there will be a very significant turnout to that, but to Mike Doyle, rest in peace. The other big news, which was big news, we don't have a lot of publicly traded companies here in Rhode Island on the big boards. Twin River is announced that it is taking over, merging with, but it's functionally a takeover of a significant Delaware gaming company, and headquarters is going to be here in Rhode Island. The company's going public. They're going to be either on the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ, according to the release that came out late yesterday. It's pretty big news here in Rhode Island.
Yeah, and it's very good. When I was director of revenue, I was responsible for working on the phase-out, the workout of the bankruptcy of the previous owners, and got a chance to work with John Taylor and his group. And it was a very easy process. Twin River and John have been great corporate citizens, worked very well with the public sector, with the legislation, with the governor, have done what they said they were going to do. Actually, they're our partner. They're taxpayers' partner because the lottery revenues, which include the video lottery terminals, which are run at Twin River and at Newport and then soon at Tiverton, are going to generate, with sports betting next year, probably about $325 million. It's the third largest individual source of state revenue. Business taxes as a group, but not as an individual tax, produce more. So the well-being of that corporation, is important to the state for a number of reasons. Not only jobs, not only private sector development, but also we have to protect our third major revenue source. The fact that they have bought the Delaware Corporation, I think it will help them by bringing additional talent to bear. It's always good to have interstate corporations housed in your state.
It's always good to be the winner, not the loser in these things, right?
Right.
The last thing you want to do is have the jobs going down to Delaware.
Yeah, no, so they have, since the rocky start with the original Twin River, it's really become a success story. Tiverton is going to be a success story as well, and hope for the best, but it certainly is a good sign for the state.
Certainly a lot of changes coming in gaming. You've got sports betting coming on as early as October. Tiverton is now scheduled, the date got moved up to September. This merger's got to get obviously finalized, but it seems to be very far along. No timeline on when the company is going public, and no announcement yet on what the implications are for employment. Hopefully, obviously, all the Rhode Island jobs we want to see held in place, but hopefully they'll be moving some jobs from Delaware potentially up here, or just that the bigger entity will be able to grow and be a bigger player nationally. So it's certainly another element of the business sector to keep an eye on. Good news that it wasn't going the other way, that Dover was not the bigger of the two entities and taking over. Rhode Island, I don't think, could absorb that right now, despite some of the claims about what the job situation is. Is it, we're not in the biggest merger and acquisition period of time in business history. It is a busy time in M&A. We saw CVS make a major acquisition. There's certainly rumors about Hasbro and Mattel that have been kicking around for the past year. Do you see that sphere, that part of that Wall Street merger and acquisition having any other impact in Rhode Island?
Well, I don't know of any impact, but I think there's been a sea change. I can remember when Mattel was rumored to buy Hasbro, and legislation had to be passed
in a day.
Yeah, to make a poison pill, so that couldn't happen. And now you see Rhode Island corporations, whether it's CVS, whether it's Hasbro, whether it's the Twin River, company, being in a position to buy other companies. So that, I think, if you look at it over a long period, a long arc of time, that seems to be an improvement. The one area, where we lost, and you can see it every day, is in financial services and financial business.
Yeah.
You count the assets of Rhode Island held banks right now, and there's some good businesses, but it's not a big number compared to some of the others. So, but I see a positive trend as far as M&A is concerned. We're not always the hunted anymore. We're doing some hunting.
Yeah, that's right. So that's some good news. I know we didn't preview it, but the Fane Tower proposal took maybe a bump or a hit last week, where the Ordinance Committee voted to recommend to the full council a negative position on the request for the zoning change and the variance on the height. As long as I've been around, the hope and the prayer was that someday we'll have a business environment in which somebody from out of town would want to come to Providence and invest hundreds of millions of dollars without a million incentives to build something. We've finally hit that stage, and opponents certainly are throwing some tax on the road. Predictions are that the vote on the full council may be more positive, or is undecided right now, but very close. Is that, if this guy comes into town, it's been well publicized both here and across New England, is that an indication that we're not the best place to come and do business?
No, it depends, because I don't think we're that much different from other people. Certainly, no one wants to look at $250 million investment in the eye and say that's not a good idea. At the same time, there's a balance. You want to protect the integrity of your community, the quality of life in your community. People have different views what that means. I think the most serious reservations about the Fane Tower with the zoning issue and spot zoning. And as a practice, I don't think anyone thinks spot zoning is a good idea. Certainly, some of your listeners and yourself, if somebody came to your neighborhood and wanted a spot zone at McDonald's, I think the neighbors would be a little bit concerned about it. So, you have to be concerned about the impact of spot zoning because you can be next. There are important principles there.
Yeah.
So, the legitimate question. Having said that, another complicating factor, politically complicating factor, is I-195. I-195 was sold as it was going to be, the center of innovation and technology, the Renaissance for Rhode Island, and a lot of the development, down there has not necessarily, been innovation and technology. In this case, it's building apartments. Hopefully, that would be a stimulus for people to come and either build jobs here or commute to Boston. But it's part of that whole consequence. The city of Providence, I think, got a bad deal, and I-95, the way it was done, was pushed down their throat. I think certain prerogatives of municipal government were kind of handled in a very cavalier way by development people in the state. And so when something like this comes up, when there's spot zoning, when there's a controversial design plan, and you put it into the broader environment of how we got to this point, how the decision was made, not to justify or take a position one way or another of whether the council or the ordinance committee is making the right decision, that is the cards that we dealt ourselves. And as a resident and as a politician in the city of Providence, I have memory. Mm-hmm. And I remember when I gave up, certain prerogatives of my city, and then you want to come back in and spot zone, maybe a very worthwhile project to spot zone. There's still that history, and it shouldn't be forgotten lightly.
But we make zoning changes all the time. I mean, spot zoning seems to be the extreme. It's an expansion of the height. That's the major
now, I
change
understand they would knock the height down 100 feet. Have you heard that? I don't know if that's accurate or not.
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's hard to negotiate when both the mayor and the president of the city council have yet to voice a clear viewpoint on this thing and have taken no leadership position.
And where's the governor stand on this thing?
Governor's been in favor of this. Senate President's been in favor of it. The Speaker of the House has been very quiet on it, but it did pass the enabling legislation to make it happen. Supposedly, according to counts, the council's probably, one vote one way or the other. But, very different time than Providence Place Mall, which required a gazillion changes. I mean, if you want to talk about spot zoning, it wasn't only spot zoning. We built a new highway for them. We did this. We moved, railroad tracks. We sold them federal land. We bought federal land. We stood on our heads and spun around like a top.
But I look at but the infrastructure issue was different, because before we had the Providence Mall, we had an eyesore of the old Chinese wall with the railroad tracks. Downtown was cut in half. What most of Providence Mall was, if my memory is correct, was a parking lot with concrete that wasn't in very good shape.
Was the URI campus? It was the yellow normal building.
The abnormal building.
Yeah.
And
I took some summer classes. Don't besmirch that building.
Was the URI?
It was URI. Yeah, it was URI's.
But everyone recognized that public facility was not in good shape.
Yep.
As a matter of fact, it was in terrible shape. It was a terrible learning facility. So I don't know if you can equate them. But I'm asking this question. Now, if the council decides they disagree with the ordinance committee, do they have to refer this back to the ordinance committee?
Yeah, unclear. There's a couple stream of thoughts. I think they can reject it. They would have to take it up separately. There would be a number of steps, but regardless, it's not over yet, and the path is not completely clear. And
now, the council won't be meeting until September, is that correct?
Special committee meetings probably likely. I think they have to take up the school budget anyways by a special council meeting. I think that's actually, one of them's tonight. There may be others. We'll see. But clearly not a lot of, in the case of Providence Place Mall, the project changed quite a bit. But for the most part, mayors and governors led, had meaningful discussions, had people in, made changes, got concessions, negotiated, and there's not a lot of that going on right now.
And there are a couple of different leadership issues.
You started with Sunland, then it went to Almond.
And Almond played a key role in that.
Absolutely.
You remember Almond's campaign. When he ran the campaign.
Will never be built.
Yeah, well, I was going to be more genteel and say he suggested reservations about it.
No, he said it will never be built. Yes.
Okay. And then, and I think Buddy was mayor at the time.
Buddy was mayor both under Sunderland and under Allman, and whatever you want to say about Buddy Cianci, he knew how to run to the front of a parade of a big construction project as good as anybody.
But he was a strong advocate for the city.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're right. How can you expect the council to take a firm position, if you don't know where the mayor stands on this?
Or the council president. I mean, both of them have been mute on the issue, literally. Yeah, it's a strange time here in Providence, but we do have motorized scooters zipping around without any permit or anything else.
Is that safe?
The mayor of Boston says they are not, and says if they show up in Boston, he's going to take them to the tow yard.
How'd they get here so quickly?
They just popped up on Monday. The scooter industry, which is zooming by right now, is in flux. One of the largest scooter rideshare programs, a Chinese company, just laid off about 75 or 80% of its workforce Thursday of last week. Let's jump over to trade wars. Jamie Dimon was making some noise, I think it was this morning on CNN, talking about, while he congratulated the president on rattling some sabers with China, thinks that China's out of control relative to the theft of intellectual properties. He was condemning the Trump administration and specifically Trump advisors on the failure to make revisions to NAFTA and develop a North Atlantic strategy. Dimon said we'd be much more effective in changing China's behavior if we spoke to them in a singular North American voice. What's your take on what's going on with the administration on international trade?
Well, like you said, oftentimes this president identifies an issue, and then he blusters and over-exaggerates, and then that's supposed to be negotiating strategy, international relations, international trade. He's way off base because there's a lot different than dealing with some real estate developers in New York City and blustering what you can do on 6th Avenue as opposed to this. So yes, he was right to raise the issue about China and intellectual property. His trade policies are a disaster. His trade policies are going to reduce the benefit of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act by about 33% for business. The best way to have an effective trade policy is through alliances. The fact that he did not get involved in the TPP probably would have been one of the more effective ways to deal with China, though he should have hit him pretty hard on this intellectual property theft, and I think he blusters about it, and he ends up hurting soy
farmers in the Midwest, in Iowa.
In the Midwest. So same thing, with NAFTA. NAFTA was 20 years old. It was time to renegotiate and modernize NAFTA. It was time to work with the EU differently. But this president is isolating America, and I never thought in my time I would see a situation where American leadership was becoming obsolete, where America as a country was just being thrown to the sideline. And this president thinks it's cute to do that. He likes to bluster. He identifies a problem, which we would all agree with, and then he exerts zero leadership in effectively implementing that program. TPP, what he's doing with China on intellectual property theft is not going to get anything done. It's just going to get their back up and have more tariff problems. EU developing its own trade agreements with Japan and isolating us. I can go on and cite.
Forget the ideology. It reminds me of the Carter administration, in which the foreign policy was so inept. We boycotted the Olympics, which did nothing. We isolated ourselves in an attempt to draw fine lines. We couldn't recover our hostages from Iran. It was a host of things.
Well, Jimmy Carter showed weakness. That's why Ronald Reagan became president in
right.
part. But at the same time, with Carter, even though some of the execution left something to be questioned, he had a first-class national security advisor, Zygmunt Brzezinski. We understood what the Cold War was about. We were philosophically, consistent, weaker than, we should have been. Some of the democratic politics of the time of not wanting to insult the Soviets till Reagan told them to tear down the wall.
Yeah.
And that doesn't compare to this. America was not isolating itself. America didn't conduct the Iranian problem as swiftly as it should. We didn't react to the fall of Russia as quickly as we could have. I could point a lot of problems, but there was not intellectual dishonesty. There was not a lack of a consistent philosophy. And I would submit one thing. Jimmy Carter did a hell of a job, better than most other presidents we had, on the Israeli-Palestine issue. He had Menachem Begin and
Anwar Sadat.
Anwar Sadat. Of course, Anwar Sadat's life.
Yeah.
But that was leadership. And so in any administration's foreign policy, you could find high and low spots. The Israeli, Palestinian, Egypt,
Camp David Accord.
Camp David Accord
was a win.
Was a real accomplishment. You point to one accomplishment of this administration, and I'll buy you a coat.
Let's jump over to the governor's race in our last couple of minutes. It is zigging and zagging all the time. We wrote a story last week about a fight between the Raimondo and Brown camps over who's taking money from who on the energy side. The Providence Journal then duplicated the story later on in the week.
Well, imitation's the best one.
It is, absolutely. The governor also refuses. Dan McKee immediately offered to donate money he had received from the Sackler family, from Purdue Pharma to treatment facilities in Rhode Island. The governor refuses to donate any money from the Sacklers. This weekend up at Harvard, there was a major demonstration by medical students at Harvard complaining about Harvard taking money from the Sacklers. That's bubbling up across the country. Art museums, universities, a real pushback against the opioid industry. What's going on in this governor's race?
Well, let's take the primaries first, because until after September 12th, there's not a governor's race. I find it the height of hypocrisy for this governor to criticize the fundraising, conduct of her opponent. I mean, she's on the road to Beverly Hills, to San Francisco, to Wall Street. Your story had a paper. You had a story, recently about the hedge fund contribution,
Absolutely.
which was treasurer, and of putting $1 billion into hedge funds. And so, if you're going to criticize your opponent, and maybe the criticism was justified, maybe it wasn't justified. My politics is certainly different from Mr. Brown's. But if you're going to criticize your opponent, make sure you don't live in a glass house. And one of the big political liabilities of this governor, and one of the reasons I think her popularity is in the low 40s, is that she's viewed as an elitist. And she's viewed as an elitist as she raises money. And something I can't explain, why the raising of money and keeping every dollar you get is that important. She certainly has enough money to run a successful campaign, and relative to whoever her opponent is, she's going to be extremely well, funded. So I can't explain that. When she criticizes Dave Brown on his fundraising, Matt Brown,
yeah.
I'm sorry, it's similar to the pot calling the kettle black. That's what that is. I can't explain
it. It is also a little strange. I mean, Matt Brown's campaign donations that she's questioning took place between 2000 and 2006. We're talking about, relative to some of her donations, checks that have just come in the door in some of these cases. She had a fundraiser scheduled in New York by one of the CEOs who was denied, tobacco CEOs who denied that there was any linkage between tobacco smoking and cancer, or that nicotine was addictive. That's what they testified, which sparked a whole Justice Department investigation of whether or not they lied to Congress. I mean, this was just a few weeks ago that she was going to have that New York fundraiser. It ultimately got canceled because of other state business, but I think some reporting on it by GoLocal might have had a little bit of an impact on it. I mean, just give the checks back. It just seems silly. The governor talks about, I think, a lot of things that people are attracted to. Let's talk about one last little.
Let me ask you one question about
Sure.
that. This political question. So, why is the governor attacking, trying to find things to attack Matt Brown on? Because Matt Brown has come lately to the campaign. The governor's fundraising.
I can tell you this. Governor Raimondo's campaign is the only campaign that is doing tracking polls on a steady basis. If the incumbent governor with $4.3 million is attacking the upstart, late entry Matt Brown, they're worried, based on their tracking polling, that Matt Brown is a real threat. You would just ignore him. I mean, you wouldn't bring up his name. You don't hear Alan Fung talking about Giovanni Ferrosi. I don't think he's uttered his name in the last year. If the person's not a threat, why would you ever talk about him? I think there's very deep concerns.
And that's the question I have.
Yeah,
and she can't find any. So this is the issue she can find. So
yeah.
she raises it.
The X factor in all of this is Aaron Ruggenberg has spent a better part of 2 years IDing voters, progressive voters, to go out and vote in this Democratic primary. He has a tough primary against incumbent Democrat Dan McKee. He knows where every single vote is. And they are going to get out progressive voters. And Matt Brown could benefit from those progressive voters who are getting more and more frustrated with mainline Democrats about not being active enough, not being progressive enough, not taking a hard enough stance and allowing people like Donald Trump to be in control of the country, etc.
Well, the Democrat Party is a crossroads. There was an excellent piece in last week's issue of The Economist.
Yeah, absolutely.
About the future of the Democrat Party. And the fight is between and for lack of better description, I'll call them pragmatic incrementalists. People who want Obamacare or improve Obamacare. They want to make, changes that the liberal base, would support. Versus what I'd call the fundamentalists, named somewhat after the Ayatollah, who want to make, fundamental,
Spoken like a true Republican.
Well, spoken like a true American, but who want to make, fundamental changes in the system, and that is the conflict. Now, in a primary, you try to, play to your base, but I think you're going to see that most Democrats kind of pivot, back to the middle, and recognize that they can't please every constituent group that's part of the party. They have to say...
I think there may be a pivot back. I don't think it's going to happen in 2018. I think you're going to see a pivot back for the presidential election in 20. But I think right now you've got a fired up progressive base. They're putting up some wins. They feel empowered. They're able to raise money. They're much better organized than anybody else on the playing field. And they've got some iconic leaders that they rally around.
Oh, I agree. I think they raise money. They're organized. They're doing a better job, with the technology of identifying and getting out their vote. Mobilize.com, et cetera.
Absolutely.
I think you're going to see the impact of that in local races. I think you're going to see the impact in legislative races. Lieutenant governor is hard to predict. Because Dan McKee has been around a while.
Yep.
He's getting out. He's doing things that are popular to the mainstream. And like anything else, it's going to depend on who takes the trouble to come out and vote in a primary in the second week in September. And that's where the progressives have a real advantage because they're motivated.
Last question. Governor Raimondo announced today that in her second term, if she is reelected, she will take her free college education now implemented at the community college level and extended to four-year colleges, Rhode Island College and URI, for the last 2 years of the four-year period. Good policy, bad policy?
Well, when you ask the question, is it good to make education, higher education, is available? Of course, it's good policy to make higher education available, but the devil is in the details. And I think she ought to spend her time focusing on two things before we have universal health, free colleges, porridge coming down and just filling up your cup with it, for free.
Maybe K through 12?
Yeah, fix up K through 12. But not only that, fix up the 2-year program at the community college. One of the biggest gripes about the community college program, once you get past the policy in place to provide free education, is the quality of that program, how quickly kids are getting out, what kind of remunerative programs they have to take, and those, and I think I would deal with that and clean that up first instead of making that statement. The other thing I would do is, the other statement I would make is get the state's financial house in order.
Yeah.
You know, we're moving towards a $227 million structural deficit by 2023. Per capita spending in Rhode Island compared to all other New England states is higher. You know, Massachusetts spends on capita about $8,900 per person. We spend about $9,200 per person. We do the same things. Why?
Right.
Vermont was a small state and also a very liberal state, spends $8,900 per capita. We spend $9,200. Again, we have the same philosophy, the same politics, the same ideology. So I think I'd fix up those problems first. I'd get the state in a position where you could do more to make education, you know, more accessible. But you do have to do it from a firm foundation. And that's the criticism, that's more and more the criticism you're going to hear about our economic development programs, is that they're boutique programs, but we're not fixing up the structure.
The money man always knows it, covers it all, from trade to Providence to you name it, he's got it.
Never in doubt.
Never in doubt. Money man, thank you so much, as always, for joining us on Business Monday here at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. We're going to be right back with Saul Kaplan from Business Innovation Factory. Hold on, innovation coming right at you. We'll be right back.